Hello and welcome to the Tuesday, September 22nd edition of the DRF Players Podcast. This is Mike Hogan. I'm joined remotely. This is the international version of the DRF Players Podcast. Joined remotely in London by Peter Thomas Fornatel. Welcome, Pete.
Thank you, sir. Pleasure to be here.
In Austin, Texas, from Mr. Jonathon Kinchen himself. Welcome, Jonathan.
Hey, what's up, guys?
This is the first time we've done one of these. I'm the only one in the studio, and we've got 2 different calls set up in 3 different locations around the world. It's pretty cool. I hope it holds together for a full hour. But so far, so good, and it's good to see you guys both, be it only via the computer.
I hope you have your filibuster material ready, Mike. If the video goes out, you can just start reading the phone book or just going over race results or something. But hopefully we'll be in business here, and hopefully I can continue to join in the pod regularly for the 4 months that I'm lucky enough to be over here in London.
I love it. I love it. Well, we got some good news to talk about first before we dive into some of the action that happened over the weekend. I tweeted out within minutes of each other because they were both announced yesterday. We had good news from 2 of the best horses that I've seen race in the past year and a half or so, or certainly raced last year. Talking about Shared Belief back in light training. Unlikely to race this year, but he's targeting a campaign for next year. That's fantastic news. And also, Lady Eli's doing so well, they're going to give her a little time at the farm, and then she'll come back to Chad Brown's barn in light training, probably in a couple months. So, yeah.
Fantastic. Just incredibly
awesome news. Yeah, I'm fired up about that.
Absolutely. I was so worried. The worry didn't last long because we very quickly figured out what happened to Shared Belief at Charlestown wasn't life-threatening. But, you have that horrible moment when you see he's not going to finish the race, that something, you go through a little bit of the emotions of, oh my gosh, something really bad could be happening here to this special horse. And of course, Lady Eli did have a life, is in the midst of, though I guess she's out of the woods in terms of the life-threatening part, but laminitis has claimed the lives of many horses. So to hear that she's back on track, as it were, it's just tremendous news. And I go back even further, Mike. You say 2 of the most impressive horses you've seen in the last year and a half. These are 2 of the most impressive horses I've seen in the last decade, I want to say. I've been in awe of what these horses have accomplished on the track, and I'm tickled to think we might actually get to see them run again.
Yeah, no, fair point. Maybe I undersold them a little bit, but I was going to say 2 Eclipse Award winners, but we talked about it on the podcast. We could see a scenario where Lady Eli goes undefeated in at least through the end of this year in 6 races and comes out without an Eclipse Award either last year or this year. But still,
I think that is going to happen.
Yeah, she's still a champion in my book.
Oh, she is.
No,
absolutely.
It's exciting to know. It's exciting to know that although we're going to lose American Pharoah this year, he'll be gone. The idea of getting those 2 back is not really an even consolation, but it helps.
Absolutely.
I think that Lady Eli's case to win the Eclipse for 3-year-old filly, it was greatly hindered by something we'll be talking about a little bit later in the show, but I don't think we want to go there yet.
No. Let's transition from the good news to some other good news. One of the 3 of us had a really good weekend. And I did okay. I don't know about you, Pete, but the guy sitting there in the black shirt that says Austin had one, just another fantastic weekend in a year full so far of fantastic weekends. Congratulations, Mr. Kinchen.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. It was a lot of fun. I tell you, the days I don't expect that I'm going to do really well happen to be the ones I do well on. The days I think I'm going to change my life forever, I lose all the money that I have in my pocket. So I wasn't expecting to do that well on Saturday, but it worked out. Things fell in line.
I was under the impression, Jonathan, you went down there to the Gulfstream Raise Your Game contest to hang out with some friends and bet some football, and sure, you take a couple of cracks and see what happens in the Raise Your Game contest. Meanwhile, our first communique shortly after 1 o'clock Eastern time on Saturday, you're already in the lead. And you managed to stay there a good portion of the day. How much did you prepare for this contest compared to your normal efforts in handicapping contests?
Yeah, I mean, usually depending on the format, my goal is always when I get to the track or the wherever the event is happening or when the first race starts of an online tournament or whatever, is to have all the work done. And then you just have to make little decisions throughout the day. Unfortunately, with travel and life and this and that and the other, sometimes it's hard to get that done. Going into this weekend, the tournament was all Gulfstream, the entire Gulfstream card, the entire Belmont card. And when I got to the track, I was done with Gulfstream completely, which I felt like was the one I wanted to start with because you had to play 5 races from Gulfstream. You didn't have to play any races from Belmont. You could have played the entire Gulfstream card. So I figured I was going to be more involved in Gulfstream races. I started there. And then the morning of, I kind of started trying to catch up with Belmont, but I probably got 3 or 4 races in until the Belmont card started. And then I was kind of just doing it on the fly as I went along.
Not necessarily the advised way of doing it, but it clearly worked out well on this occasion. You had a big hit in the middle of the day. I was on a John Kimmel horse at Belmont. Tell us about that horse and what your play was there and how you decided to be so aggressive on that one.
Yeah, it's like a lot of people. I've gotten a lot of congratulations, and I'll keep them coming. I'll take them all, but a lot of times, some of the big scores that I have and the big success I have is just taking the opinions of people that I respect, and when they all happen to align in one certain situation, it helps me push harder on that horse. There was not a ton that I loved about the horse. The horse made sense. He was, he had those 2 dirt sprints that he had figures that if those figures were to improve with him switching to grass, he was better than the other horses in that field. And so, it turns out that I look really smart because he won the race at 8-1, but I had bet just as much money on him running second and third in that try combination that it just happened to happen the sexy way. If he would have ran second, I still would have had a $24 try. I wouldn't have paid nearly as much. My $200 win wouldn't have been any good. But, I think a lot of the horses I try to identify are horses that are doing something different. And if they're doing something different, then there's that chance for improvement. And it's an improvement that the tote board won't reflect. If it's, you have a horse like American Pharaoh or Lady Eli, we know what they are, right? You know that they're going to run. There's not going to be much improvement because their B race is better than anyone else's A race. So you got to try to find those spots. And I was just fortunate enough that it happened in that race that horse went wire. Chris DiCarlo, my friend Nick tweeted out that Mike Smith should understand that Chris DiCarlo is my new favorite jockey, and he is because he won 2 big races for me on Saturday.
That's great. You talk about listening to other people's opinions. For a lot of players, that can be the worst thing they can do because they, for whatever reason, a lot of people, when they're hearing the opinions of others, they don't know how to process and integrate other people's opinions with their own opinion, and you end up getting off things you liked or using horses you didn't like, etc., etc. I'm really intrigued by the fact that you've turned your ears into a strength, not a weakness. Do you have any advice for other people about how to effectively listen to the opinions of other players and integrate the information you're getting from them without sort of selling your own opinion short?
Yeah, right. I mean, I don't let other people's opinion cancel out my opinion. I just let other people's opinions supplement my opinion or make me feel more confident in my choice. My buddy John Doyle had a nice note that he had sent me that he thought that horse would improve on turf. The guy for the DRF workout report liked the horse. A buddy of mine, John Nichols, said that he watched the horse work on the turf at Saratoga. And that's those are 3 people that I respect their opinion, and I like the horse a little bit, and he's 8-1. It's almost kind of easy, and it had nothing to do with my own, with people with good opinions and allow those opinions to be supplements rather than, I wouldn't get off the horse because someone else is talking you on to something else or talking you off. But that's how I use it, just as a supplement to my opinion that I already have.
credit where credit is due. I believe that note from John Doyle was originated by sometime podcast listener and handicapping contest aficionado Emily Gullickson, who I know has been doing a little bit of trip work for Mr. Doyle in his exciting new endeavor. So I want to get a shout out to May Emily out there for sure. So when we spoke next on Saturday, you were in first place. You'd hit this bet, and you said to me with great confidence, I think I'm done. I'm just going to wrap up. My minimums are mostly out of the way. I'm playing for third place because in this contest, third place is so similar to first place. The first three spots all won an NHC seat and a BCBC seat. Talk about that decision a little bit. It seemed to me at the time, while very sensible, to maybe go a little bit against the aggressive nature that you're known for.
Yeah, no, my aggressiveness really put me into a two-hour, it wasn't that long, depression at Del Mar. My buddy Bill Sherman, who's obviously a great tournament player, we had the privilege of sitting with him at Del Mar, and I had gotten out to a pretty big lead early, and he kept telling me, just bet show bets, just bet show bets, just bet show bets, and me being the young, dumb, I think I got it figured out guy, I just kept betting. And I was like, no, I'm gonna crush this thing. And I ended up blowing that opportunity. And it was frustrating because the amount that I was at, if I would have just stayed there, I would have got third or fourth in that tournament. It would have been worth a lot of money. So I told myself I wouldn't do that again. And so when I got to Saturday and I got into such a good position, I said, I'm going to just wrap up. It's going to be almost impossible for me not to get third because the way that the format was set up, people weren't going to try to go for the win. They were going to just try to get first, second, or third. So I wouldn't have a lot of people bombing away behind me. And I did that for majority of the day. And then at some point, somebody jumped in front of me about like $1,000, $1,200. And then this thing started boiling in my stomach where I was like, I really want to win this thing. And so I didn't do anything drastic, but going into the last race, I was in second place. I was $240 in front of Chris Larmy, and I knew he wasn't going to come for me. So I told myself I would bet 230, and I would bet that 230 to see if I can maybe get something. But I wanted to make sure that 230 would be at least enough for me to catch the winner, who was about $1,000 ahead of me. I couldn't bet the horse I wanted to win, so I bet a try with that horse on top. I had a $10 try, and that pushed me to 10 or whatever, and so that's how I got the win.
Amazing. See, I think that's really smart. In the previous example at Del Mar, you bet yourself out of a winning position. You bet yourself out of your goal, which I remember talking to you before that tournament. Your goal was to finish in the top 4. It wasn't to win. And the actions you took sort of made your goal harder to get to. This time around, your goal was still your goal, but you put yourself in a position where you almost had a free roll with that $240 at the end, $230, whatever it was. And to me, that's just a really smart adjustment on the fly. I actually used it. I don't think you saw this yet. I have a column that's going to be going up on DRF.com any minute about how I think it's really important for contest players to set a goal at the beginning of the tournament and know going in what you want to achieve, because in the middle of a tournament, so much different stuff is going on. Your brain is working in 17 different directions. You're paying attention to the various tracks, the various races. To me, it's very difficult in that moment to make the sort of decision, okay, I'm okay with the top 4 here, or I really need to win, or whatever. I feel like your goal is one of the few pieces of information you can nail down before a tournament begins, and it's been great to watch you this year, time and time again, making these goals. So, looking forward for the rest of the year, what does your tournament year look like? What's next for Jonathon Kinchen? What's on your radar here?
Yeah, no. So I'm gonna BC qualify. On Saturday I got a round 2 seat, so I'll be playing in that this Saturday for a second Breeders' Cup seat, which you can't have 2. So I'll have a lucky friend or my dad will get to come along on a trip if I can get lucky this weekend and get another Breeders' Cup seat for the BCBC. And then I'm going to go to Santa Anita because anytime Santa Anita has a tournament, I'm going to go to it. So if I have any friends or family that are planning on getting married or having kids on that day, you should probably reconsider. And then I'm going to go to the BCBC, of course, and then Del Mar. And then I'm planning to, hopefully, no one does anything crazy on the tour, and I can just take the entire second half of November, entire December and January off, getting ready for what could be a pretty cool opportunity at the NHC.
Do you envision yourself taking extra steps at the NHC? Potentially, you're going to have a $2 million bonus on the line. I know last year you did a lot of extra work. I remember you telling me you even changed your diet in advance of the NHC. You made all kinds of special preparations. What do you think this year's special preparations will entail, especially with that extra $2 million on the line? Let's face it, you are the NHC Tour champion of 2015. I do not think you can be caught mathematically, hardly at this point. I guess mathematically you can, but realistically you can't. So, $2 million, how does that change your plan?
Like, hey, don't mush me. I've seen horses at the quarter bowl by 6 that I thought couldn't lose get run down. So, I think I have a pretty good shot. I think what I'll do if I have that opportunity, if I'm lucky enough to have that opportunity, is I'm going to try to watch every Santa Anita race of the meet leading up to that. I'm going to try to watch every race at Tampa leading up to that, every race at Aqueduct leading up to that, and obviously Oaklawn, Fairgrounds. Those are a little bit tricky because a lot of horses ship in. So I'm going to try to have good trip notes for every race leading up to there. And it's going to be like almost my full-time job. That's my plan for that 2 months leading into it. I'm going to do everything in my power to take advantage of that opportunity because it's one of those things that's not likely to happen again. And I don't want to wake up Sunday morning in Vegas and think that I could have done something to give myself a better shot. If I work hard and I get beat, then I get beat. But I'm going to do everything I can.
The last thing before we segue back to talking about some of the races this weekend, you did make another revelation to me. I don't even know if you remember doing this. I sort of caught you at a funny moment on Saturday night in the midst of your victory celebration, and you made a bold declaration that you were definitely going to try to win the Tour next year as well, no matter what happens from here on out. Are you standing by those words, or was that the champagne talking?
Yeah, I appreciate you trying to downplay my condition. But yeah, no, I mean, yes, I want to try to win it again just because it's been so much fun. Obviously, I'm not going to make any crazy financial investments into doing that where it becomes ridiculous, but I'll definitely make some effort in that direction, and if I can kind of get things rolling or kind of roll a little bit of the success from this year into next year, like I'll definitely try to do it again.
Well, fantastic. We look forward to your further exploits this year. We have a special little podcast cameo there from my wife, Susan. This is what happens when you set up to do the podcast in your kitchen. Say hi to the people, Susan. But and talk for a second. Just for a second, players cannot buy into round 2 on Saturday for BCQualify.com, but during the next month or so, there are going to be a handful more contests on BCQualify.com of the one-day variety. Folks will have a chance to win their way in and join Jonathon out there at Keeneland. That's going to be a lot of fun at the BCBC. And then Jonathon also mentioned the Santa Anita contest. I want to point out that DRFQualify.com will be running qualifiers on there. I think maybe even both days this weekend. Have you looked yet at that, Jonathon?
I haven't looked, but they did that last week, and I would assume they're doing the same thing unless the guys at DRF Qualify have picked up another event to qualify for, but I haven't heard anything yet.
They're always working in that direction, so anything's possible. You can check the schedule there, and of course check the schedule at NHCQualify.com for all the latest events happening on the official online qualifying site at the NHC, NHCQualify.com. Now, the big races on the weekend in terms of the Eclipse Award voting potentially were not part of your contest. They happened at Parks, formerly known as
You're showing your
Philly
age
Park.
there, Pete.
Yeah, well, at least I didn't call it Keystone, which I almost did. But there was a side bet in one of those races, the Cotillion, that was made right here on this DRF Players podcast that I listened to during my long walk across London last Friday, because I don't miss an episode.
It was actually in the PA Derby.
Oh, it was in the PA Derby. Well, remind folks what happened there, Mike, and tell us
Well,
about this glorious victory of yours.
Yes, I mean, on the podcast, you can listen to it if you haven't already. Matt and I, with special guest Lonnie Goldfeder, we talked about the race and how the scratch of Gimme Dilute really, in my opinion, made, and in a lot of people's opinion, made Mr. Z potentially loose on the lead, or at least the lone speed early. And Mr. Matt Bernier kind of vehemently disagreed to the point of saying, I don't even think he's not only the lone speed. I think that Islandtown is faster out of the gate and will get the lead. So I had a number of opinions, most of which were borne out to be incorrect within the 2 minutes of the running of the race, one of which being Frosted at a short price was one worth playing against. But I was validated, at least in the running of the race, and in my opinion, that Mr. Z was going to go to the early lead. Matt and I put a $5 win wager on who would be, or a $5 wager on who would be the leader at the first call. And not only did Mr. Z lead up until the stretch, I don't believe Islandtown was ever in front of Mr. Z at any point in the running of the race.
So I have to ask, Mike, where are you going to spend those big winnings off Mr. Bernier?
Well, so Matt pretty much eats every day at Subway, and you know from their marketing campaign that you can get a 1 foot 12-inch sandwich for that wager. I, however, prefer to frequent the many different food carts in New York City, and my favorite one, which is actually there today. It's one of these ones where you don't know which day it's going to be there. It's actually there today. It's a Korean food cart where they do Korean gyros, I guess they call them here. And so I'll get the chicken gyro with kimchi and extra kimchi. It's $4.50, so I even get 50 cents back to either leave as a tip or or have as a I don't know. Probably.
You can bet a cold 50 cent cold pick 4.
There you go.
There you go. There you go. Parlay it into
cold.
something more.
Yes, exactly. So that was my strongest opinion, certainly, of the PA Derby, or at least the one that was borne out best.
Well, you shouldn't feel too bad about your thought that Frosted might be back a little quick. Kieran McLaughlin himself had quotes both pre and post race saying, "Oh, this isn't usual for me." Anytime you have a trainer saying things like that, I mean, it always gives me a little bit of pause. But boy, was Frosted good in the race. I just think he has really come into his own, and the result super duper flatters our friend American Pharoah, of course. I mean, I was of the mind that Frosted probably ran, when you consider the pace dynamics, the second best race in the Travers when he made the aggressive move in an attempt to get American Pharoah beat, and it obviously kind of backfired from his perspective in the sense that, as we talked about in here, I don't think it was the huge mistake that some have said. I think he thought that if he won that duel, if he won that battle, that he would win the war that day. But it does the result. That result certainly makes it seem like if he'd been running for second to American Pharoah, he certainly would have won. As terrific of a performance as it was by Frosted, it didn't make me think that he would have won the Travers with a different ride. If you're following where I'm going with that, what do you guys think?
I would agree, Jonathan. I mean, we've talked about the Travers quite a bit on the podcast and on the webinar with Randy Moss. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, that was a tough race for everyone, obviously, for financial reasons, Pete, and also just for emotional reasons. But I mean, I think when you look at it a little bit more after the fact and kind of see what happened that day, is that I guess it was the third quarter or second. They were running, and he was engaged earlier and had to withstand that run a lot longer than I think that any horse would want to have to withstand, to hold on with that run, and he just got beat, and Frosted had a big part in beating him that day. Even more so, which this might sound crazy, I think that Frosted had more he was more involved with him getting beat than Keen Ice was involved in him getting beat. And so,
For sure.
I know watching that race on Saturday made me say, it made me feel a lot better about what happened to American Pharoah. It made me feel a lot more confident in his ability going forward and confident in what we saw from him in the past. So, he's still a horse that I think that, I don't think there's going to be much value on American Pharoah in the classic, unless of course Beholder wins by 27 today. I mean, this weekend, and then maybe that will help. But I think that they fly. I think those two horses. Frosted's a good horse, and he's proven that on a couple of occasions in races that he would have won if it wasn't for American Pharoah.
Question for both of you guys. You are part of the Godolphin ownership team, Kieran McLaughlin, and you're talking about the Breeders' Cup. Where do you go? Where do you go with Frosted? Do you take another shot?
Not to take anything away from the dirt mile, but if it was a one-turn dirt mile, it'd be different. But it's going to be, it's Keeneland. It's the two-turn dirt mile with the short stretch, and and Godolphin they've got enough excitement going on through their year that running in the dirt mile is probably not going to be like the greatest moment of their year. So go ahead and give it a shot.
Well,
I tend to agree. I think it's the classic.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I think the only the flip side to that, I think in reality that's what they'll do. The flip side to that is you've multiple times shown that you're maybe not as good as the best horse of your generation, not to mention potentially against older horses like Honor Code, Beholder, even Liam's Map and Tonalist. And whereas a race like the Dirt Mile is likely, I mean, it's still got a fantastic purse. It's likely going to have, I mean, who's going to show up in there that's going to really scare anybody off? And it also, if you've got Frosted, who I haven't heard about the plans for next year, but I got to imagine they're likely going to keep him in training. Maybe the goal next year is the Breeders' Cup Classic for him when you don't have American Pharoah, when you're not as likely to have, a lot, maybe you have Shared Belief coming back if all things go well. But, maybe it's not as tough a Breeders' Cup Classic next year as what it looks like it's shaping up to be this year.
That's an interesting point. I think it's almost surely correct that next year's group won't be as tough as this year's group. But there's a few things to consider. One, the old, I think it's an Alan Jerkins line, you never duck one horse. So even though I think we've all seen American Pharoah prove on the track that he's a better horse than Frosted is, just because American Pharoah's there isn't reason not to go, because he could stub his toe, anything could happen, and Frosted, to me, still deserves a chance to step up and have a chance to show not necessarily just where he stands in his generation, but where he stands against older horses. And I don't think Godolphin, I kind of think Godolphin just, one of you guys made this point already, don't really care about the dirt mile. Like they're out there, they campaign their horses to win the greatest races in the world. They have one who fits pretty clearly in the biggest dirt race in the world here. Well, I'm going to go ahead and call it the biggest dirt race in the world. So I think that's the move. I mean, you raise an interesting point, and I surely do hope that he stays in training, regardless of what decision they make for the Breeders' Cup. He's a super cool horse who I think, it was that Dan Illman made the great point about how that horse would have been viewed if at the top of the lane in Florida that day, instead of having the breathing problem or whatever he had, when he looked like he was going to win by 4 and stopped like he was glued to the quarter pole. If that hadn't happened, if he'd done what looked like he was in the process of doing that day, how differently he'd have been perceived since then. Go back and look at the form with your note in formulator that says, throw this out. He had a breathing problem that's been fixed. And look at the races he's run since then. It's extremely impressive, and he is a very cool horse.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think you're absolutely right that we'll see him next in the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile, in the Breeders' Cup Classic, not the Dirt Mile.
I was going to say that's the opposite of what I just said, Mike. What's going on here?
Sorry, I've got the dirt mile in the brain because what I wanted to say was it's almost a shame that the dirt mile hasn't really caught on, because when you think about it from a stallion standpoint, people talk about the mile being really the kind of race that makes a stallion, the Met Mile in particular, but which of course is, as Jonathan mentioned, a one-turn mile. So it's a little bit of a shame that the dirt mile is kind of the redheaded stepchild of the Breeders' Cup, and you get second and sometimes even third tier horses showing up for these huge purses that don't really end up making a horse's career or even a stud career. I mean, I'm guessing you've never heard a trainer in March say, "This is my Breeders' Cup dirt mile horse."
Yeah, it's because to me it shouldn't. Oh, you go ahead, Jonathan. Then I'll give you my negative thoughts in general on the race that is the dirt mile. But you go first.
I think the only negative you can say about Santa Anita as a host for the Breeders' Cup, the only negative, is the fact that it's a two-turn dirt mile. I think that the turf sprint is wonderful down the hill because you can have a sprinter and you can have a horse cutting back. Everything else is great about it. The weather, the everything, the facility. But the two-turn dirt mile is the only negative, which is Churchill. Churchill, and Belmont would have that advantage. And I think that's probably why it's lost a little bit. Yeah, Gulfstream. Although there's no way they would be able to fit all of these people, but
Right.
but I'm sure people said the same thing about Keeneland.
Right.
But I think that if it was always a one-turn race, I think it would be a little bit more popular. Horses would kind of maybe point forward a little bit more. But now it's just become I'm not good enough for the Classic, or the Classic is too far for me type of race.
Mm-hmm. And don't forget, it also, the reason I don't like the race is, to me, it detracts potentially from two races, the Classic and also the Sprint. In the old days of the Breeders' Cup, you sort of had to choose. And to me, one of the things I don't like about the dirt mile is it allows this sort of bet hedge of the dirt mile, even when it's one turn. In some ways, I think it's even worse when it's one turn. I used to enjoy, it was interesting to see if these horses that were more the 7 furlong mile one turn types could cut back to the sprint. This kind of takes, to me, the dirt mile is one of the races that kind of takes something away from the Breeders' Cup, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, it's a fair opinion, and I won't really disagree. And it's kind of played out that way in terms of the quality of horse we've seen, taking nothing away from a horse like Golden Sense. But it's not really the kind of race that anybody really points for if they've got a good horse. It's kind of a fallback option that is a very, very nice purse, and I don't know. I'm kind of with you, Pete. It seems like the one that doesn't really fit, and maybe it makes sense to just kind of pull the plug and let that one ride into the sunset.
Did you guys have any other thoughts about the Pennsylvania Derby?
Nothing really. Go ahead.
I thought Iron Fist ran pretty well, and if you watch the replay, he galloped out in front, and who knows? I mean, maybe Frost was being pulled up more aggressively than he was, but I'm a big gallop out person, and I thought Iron Fist ran really well, and he's had some really good races in his short career, and I would look for him to continue to progress, and hopefully he can have a big year next year. But I think he's a pretty good horse.
I would agree. Yeah, I thought. And there was a time when I thought maybe he could have won the race, and then Frost had just kind of outclassed him. But considering he's relatively lightly raced, and I don't even know what the details were, but I got to imagine he had some sort of issue that kept him out of training for a while, because he missed quite a bit. What was it, about 8 or 9 months of races? So maybe he's only now kind of rounding into form as a late progressing 3-year-old. Let's not forget, he was the horse that was favored the only time American Pharoah was not the favorite in any of his races.
The Ohm race back at Del Mar, was that?
No, the Ohm race, American Pharoah was the favorite, but coming out of that race, they all went into the Del Mar Futurity, and Iron Fist was the favorite, and American Pharoah was the second choice.
Well, he's better than American Pharoah. Here we go. Let's go.
That's where form comparisons get very tricky.
The other really big race on Saturday at Parks was the Cotillion, I don't know if either of you were able to watch it or have done much work on it, but we talked about it a bit on the podcast leading into it, and we talked about what it sets up for 3-year-old fillies if Embellish the Lace or I'm a Chatterbox wins. I'm a Chatterbox won. She looked very impressive. Calamity Kate ran very well running second, and Peace and War, who Matt and I were both on, ran well to get up late for third. But I really feel like this puts I'm a Chatterbox kind of in the driver's seat for 3-year-old filly.
No doubt about it.
I
I think that.
I would agree. Go ahead, Pete.
Oh no, I'm just going to concur with that sentiment. That I think you've got your unless something. Granted, things can still happen from here, but I think that the Lady Eli case gets harder to make. With I'm a Chatterbox doing as well as she did earlier in the year, and then coming back for a run like that. I mean, I suppose the divisional race is far from over, but I think if things were over right now, I think I'd have to vote for 3-year-old filly.
Yeah, and it's almost a shame. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, go ahead. No, you got it, Mike.
Well, I was just going to say it's almost a shame that there's not a, I'm going to sort of contradict myself a little bit in terms of what we were talking about with the Breeders' Cup and how there's just too many options. It's almost a shame that there's not another option for the Eclipse, because if we had a 3-year-old turf filly, that would be a fantastic division between Lady Eli, Centerio Italia, and even Lady Shipman, who's been amazing as a 3-year-old turf sprinter. It would be a really tough vote. Of course, all of those are going to, maybe some of them will get some consideration as 3-year-old filly goes. But you're right. I think I'm a Chatterbox, at least in this point, is definitely the leader in the clubhouse.
What did you think of that race, Jonathan?
Yeah, well, I liked Embellish the Lace in the Alabama because of the distance. And I have disliked I'm a Chatterbox in her, and I didn't like her in the Oaks. I didn't like her in the Alabama. I didn't like her in the coaching club. And so it was like a foregone conclusion to me that she was going to win this race based on the fact that she was cutting back and how well she'd run going further, when I didn't think that she would run further. Obviously, Embellish the Lace, the last time was the time to have her. But I think it's an interesting thing to consider is there's a likely chance that those two fillies are going to avoid Beholder and not have to race against Beholder in the distaff. And if it would happen to go the other way with Embellish the Lace winning the Breeders' Cup distaff, that could kind of result in like a split decision situation where it could get kind of tricky, where a lot of votes start getting to go in different directions. And who knows, maybe Lady Eli could slip back into the conversation. I think it'd be pretty tough and it'd be hard, and that's not necessarily where I would vote, although I think she's phenomenal. But so I think that if it goes a different direction, it could start to get kind of confusing with a lot of votes going in different areas.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm a continent away here. But the last I heard about Beholder, there was no distaff. It was the BC Classic. Have they changed the tune on that one?
No, that's what I'm saying. She won't be in that race, and so one of those fillies has a really good chance of winning the distaff.
Gotcha. I'm sorry, I misunderstood.
Yeah, and when those fillies end up beating, or when those horses end up beating each other up, and trading decisions, that's when you do, I think, as Jonathan's point was a good one, that's where you do see some splintering of the votes, and it could open the door for an outsider. But yeah, I think Lady Eli's a little up against it, which is a shame unless people look at it as almost like a lifetime achievement award, combining what she did last year along with what could have been this year.
If it gets confusing enough, maybe a scenario like that develops, like Jonathan was intimating. But I think, not unlike last year, where we talked about this on the pod a lot, where the three of us anyway felt like Lady Eli was the more brilliant filly than Take Charge Brandy. I think in the end, we all voted for Take Charge Brandy based on resume, because at least in our view, the Eclipse Awards were about what a horse accomplishes on the track, looking at that curriculum vitae, that resume, as opposed to just trying to analyze who the more special or brilliant one is. I think, unfortunately, with what happened with the health situation with Lady Eli, that's probably what's going to happen here. I think if she had stayed in training, if she hadn't gotten sick and she'd had another, even one more win or two, I think that the sentiment to give her the award in that sort of lifetime achievement kind of way would have mounted. I just think between the truncated campaign and the fact that it's turf versus dirt and the various voter prejudices, etc., it's going to be tricky. But she's still she's my favorite of all of them for whatever that's worth.
What about, here's a question for you, Pete. I kind of asked it to Matt on the podcast last week, but I'll ask you, what about as just older turf filly or mare? I mean, who is she going to compete against if you talk about the older ones? Not 3-year-old filly where you bring in the dirt ones, but if we're just talking turf, older filly and mare, where would she fit?
3-year-olds are eligible for. My first question is: are 3-year-olds eligible? When I hear older, I start to think 4 and up. You think older means just not 2-year-olds?
I think just means not 2-year-olds. I could be wrong. I'd have to take a look at what the exact rules were with the voting. But if you're comparing, because presumably if she were healthy and in training, she would be facing older in the Breeders' Cup.
Good point.
So,
yeah, I'm sure that's happened before, where a 3-year-old has won one of those awards. As I think about it for a second.
Right. So.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I would guess whichever Chad Brown filly wins the filly and mare turf would have a pretty good advantage in that regard. If what's the chances we're happening? Well, I don't know. That might not go over well after that DQ, but I'm halfway joking.
There's still the possibility that somebody comes over from overseas. The only race here is the Breeders' Cup. They win convincingly. You've got Stephanie's Kitten. What's the chances? You've got these other horses that kind of have been beating up on each other here, and you've got an undefeated, potentially, unknown what the ceiling is for a filly like Lady Eli. Does she back into that award?
Very interesting idea that had not occurred to me one bit. But as you're talking about it, I don't have the answer of who would definitely get my vote now ahead of her. So I think it is, without looking at PPs or doing the proper research, it does sound like it's a possibility for a little bit of that sort of lifetime achievement award, assuming a one-offer comes over here from Europe and wins the fillies race in the Breeders' Cup.
Right. Anyway, interesting stuff. So we'll go back to the racing over the weekend. The races on Saturday, at least at Belmont, led to a double carryover?
No, more than that.
Triple carryover.
I think it wasn't quite. I thought it was
four.
Four?
Yeah.
Four?
609,000.
Wow.
Wow.
So
being over here and heading out to Plumpton Racecourse for the day, which was a fantastic experience. This beautiful racetrack just an hour outside the city of London, but couldn't be more rural. They were having a sort of a family day, so Perrin got to eat ice cream and go on the bouncy castle while Susan and I, shepherded her around, but also took some time to grab some beers and make some bets. I wasn't focused on the Belmont Pick 6, but I know, Jonathan, you took a little swing at it, right?
Yeah, no, we were talking earlier, and I've said a million times, the greatest part of this tournament stuff is the people you get to meet and that you get to hang out with at the racetrack. And we went on Sunday to watch football because they had the Sunday ticket there at Gulfstream, and so we went to watch football and play the Pick 6. And I sat at a table with about 5 other pretty serious horse players, and so it wasn't hard to get everybody to chip in a couple $100 and take an honest swing at the Pick 6. We went 5 of 6. We lost the race where Trophy got beat, diminishing head, which would have been worth about 40-50 grand. So, but we had a good we had a fun time, and it was fun to kind of throw that ticket together with some other guys and get their opinions as people that are actually putting in the work that you're putting in. So it was a lot of fun.
when you put together a group ticket like that, do you try to incorporate everybody's opinion, or does you sort of pick a captain of the team who might ask questions but is ultimately in charge of the decisions? How do you do that? Because I think that's something that listeners should really think about. Maybe not so much for the pick six, where you really still need such a significant bankroll, but maybe there's some smaller bankroll players out there who want to get some friends together and put together some pick four tickets or even pick three tickets on a big day like the Breeders' Cup. Give folks advice what a good way to make a partnership like that work is.
Well, I think that there's etiquette when you're doing group ticket making. There's a couple of different things. One, you want to make sure that you don't like horn in on someone's action. Obviously, if you have some really close friends, you don't have to really worry about that. But you just kind of say like, hey, do you want an investor? Do you got 5%, 10%, 20%, that I can jump in on your ticket? And if you jump in on someone else's ticket, then you don't need to make any suggestions. If they ask for your opinion, then you can provide it. But otherwise, just put your money in and be quiet. They did all the work. I think if you're sitting in a big group of people, then I think there's a place for like interacting with each other. Like, hey, well, what do you like in the third? Well, I love the 4. Oh, you love the 4? Okay, well, let's use the 4. I don't really like the 7. Oh, but I love the 7. Okay, well, we'll throw the 7 in. And so you kind of eliminate and add as you guys are all sitting in a circle talking. I think the only way that works, though, is if you're involved for all 4 of the pick 4 races or all 6 of them. But like coming in late and jumping in on one race after you've kind of missed the rest of it can kind of be annoying. I've never experienced it. I can just imagine that it would be pretty annoying, but I do recommend it. It's a great way to involve everyone that you're with, because winning alone isn't very much fun. So that's one thing. Losing together is better than losing by yourself. And then, you get a lot of other people's influence and opinion when it works out. But no, it's something I've just started doing like last year. We typically haven't done that. My other person I used to go to the racetrack with all the time, he just kind of did his thing and I did mine, and now we've been doing that a lot more. It's a lot more fun.
Were you the architect of the pick six Sunday, or was it somebody else in the group?
No, it was more. I would say it was probably more Nick than it was me. Nick, my buddy Nick Tamaro, because Nick follows NYRA. He handicaps full NYRA cards every day, and so I was the one that was writing, but he was the one that was kind of helping us along with the big opinions, and we should have listened to him. He wanted to single that horse in the last race, and we were all a little bit nervous about that, and the horse won at like 5-6 to 1, so that would have helped us out a lot if we would have done that. But no, it was more Nick than me, but it was Nick and I probably the main two to put it together.
Jonathan, there's this program I want to tell you about called Ticketmaker. Maybe if you'd gone ahead and used Ticketmaker and pressed Nick's opinion in the last race, you'd be sitting here telling us how you won $50,000 instead of giving us, or $40,000 instead of giving us this sob story here today. What do you think about that?
I think that you are 100% right, that if I had, we'd already touched on this a little bit, but our conversation on Saturday night, my condition had unfortunately carried over a little bit. Not only did the pick six carry over, but my condition carried over to Sunday morning a little bit. So we were moving a little bit slower than I think we would have all liked to have. And so we were kind of rushing to get the thing in. And it happened to be Caveman, when I really do think if it would have been Ticketmaker, we would have hit it.
Well, you still had a pretty good weekend, so just can't knock winning.
No, not at all.
I got one question for you about group tickets like that. Do you feel, there are some people that think, and I guess there's something to it, that when you have a group like that, you tend to limit the ability to catch the big long shots, because if you've got a group that has to come together to some consensus, by definition, that means you land on the horses that seem more likely. Do you ever see that being an issue, or has that been? How do you deal with that when you're in a group?
I think if you play with a group of people that like genuinely respect the opinions of the other ones, like it's easy. If Nick likes the 30 to 1 shot, like I'm using the horse because I know that Nick does the work, and I would think that Nick feels the same way about me. And so if you do that, if you're playing with people that you respect, then it's usually not an issue. I do think that conversely, the trouble that comes from it is there's situations in which you probably need to take a stand and maybe single a horse or maybe lean on a horse more, and that becomes more challenging because you have to have an aligned opinion on that, which is more of a challenge. It's harder, I think, to single a 2-to-1 shot than it is to use a 25-to-1 shot in a group situation.
Fair.
It's interesting. Yeah, Mike, that's why I asked before about that idea of the ticket architect bringing in other people's opinions. Because I think if everybody in a big group had to agree about every horse, you would maybe get into that sort of groupthink idea where it becomes harder, maybe a little bit to stretch. So I think there's definitely a sweet spot in there where you have sort of a mastermind or masterminds, and then you have people who are more investors who are there to also give opinions when warranted. In my mind, that's the best way to construct a ticket like that. And of course, in an ideal world, if you have more time and you can use a program like Ticketmaker, you can use that to emphasize certain horses. You can the Ticketmaker, you can quote unquote single without really singling, just by having maybe one horse that's your A, but you still have your backup lines that are Bs. So, once again, no matter what kind of bet you're constructing, to me, you're going to do a better job of it if you're using Ticketmaker in the first order. And sometimes Ticketmaker isn't even enough. Then you'll want to go through and examine those bets and see if there's a way you can reinforce what your real opinion is even more by doing some manual adjustments to it. But for me, that's your question is a really good one. If everybody has to agree 100%, you're going to end up with a lot of short price horses on your ticket, I think, or you're not. In any case, you're not going to get the full benefits, I think, of having all that brain power at your fingertips by going in together with all your friends.
Right, and then on Saturday, Nick and I and my buddy Blake Jesse, who won the Arlington tournament, he was sitting with us. We played the pick 4 at Parks and at Gulfstream together, and we hit both of those. We did those Ticketmaker, and one of the things that happened is kind of reminded me, and this is like kind of a good answer to one of those questions, is like, if 2 of the guys of the 3 don't like a horse, but 1 does, then we did this happen. We use that horse as a B horse, where you still give some respect and you still allow their investment to be considered, but you just don't spend as much on it because only one of the 3 likes the horse. So that's definitely a way you can kind of do that if you're in a bigger group.
Makes sense. That's good. All right, gentlemen. Well, I don't know if we have anything else to cover. We discussed quite a lot in this international edition of the DRF Players Podcast. It was a true pleasure having you both on, even if it was different parts of the world. And I hope we do it again sometime soon. And Jonathan, I hope at least being able to see you for an hour and kind of bask in the glow is sending some luck my way.
I've tried rubbing his head for luck. It doesn't work, folks. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Any closing comments before we have Pete wrap it up?
May you win all your photos.